Welcome to this last recorded input for the online event, European Green Deal and EU Macro-Regional Strategies, to be held on 21st and 22nd September. In this presentation, we will look into EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. It's my great pleasure to pass the floor to Karin Zaunberger, representing DG Environment, Unit D2 Biodiversity. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Karin Zaunberger. I work in the Biodiversity Unit of the European Commission in the Directorate General for Environment, and it's my pleasure to present to you today the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, bringing nature back into our lives. This strategy was adopted in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. It will also be a central element of the EU's recovery plan. It will be crucial to prevent and build resilience to future zoonosis outbreaks and to provide immediate business and investment opportunities for restoring the EU's economy. The EU Biodiversity Strategy is an integral part embedded in the European Green Deal. You've heard quite some presentations on this European Green Deal already. Protecting and restoring ecosystem is kind of a red line that goes across the European Green Deal, and it has become a bit of the leitmotif, like of the political guidelines of our president, of Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. The Biodiversity Strategy tries to address the global biodiversity crisis that is presented here in this graph that has been taken from the IPBES Global Assessment on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We see that thanks or following or due to direct and indirect drivers, biodiversity is continuing to be lost at an unprecedented manner. Ecosystems are degraded. It's direct and indirect drivers that are working together and accelerate these negative trends. It's urgently that we need to address these direct and indirect drivers in an integrated manner. Biodiversity underpins sustainable development. It's not only about beautiful flowers and butterflies. It's essential for our well-being, for our prosperity, for our health. Biodiversity loss is therefore a key threat for humanity, a key threat for civilization. And also for our economy. Almost half of the global GDP is somehow, one way or the other, linked to nature. The connections between biodiversity, there are clear connections between biodiversity, climate, and pandemics. We can say that these crises, these global challenges are interdependent, and therefore they can only be solved in an integrated manner. And therefore, restoring biodiversity and ecosystems and their services is a core part of the recovery. Why is now the time to take action? It's for our health. There are clear links have been shown between nature destruction and the increased risk of outbreaks of infectious diseases, and in particular zoonotic diseases that are diseases that jump from the animal world to the humans. And there's the need for resilient recovery. We need to stimulate jobs, and we need transformative, deep and fast transformative change in a post-COVID-19 world. Otherwise, recovery will not be resilient. Going back to the situation as before means going back to a crisis situation. And we need to design our way out of this global planetary emergency. And the strategy sets out our role in the world. The world is watching and looking for the EU for leadership towards the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity, where the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework shall be adopted. Now to the EU Biodiversity Strategy, there are three main elements: protect nature, restore nature, enable transformative change, and EU stands ready to be a leader for an ambitious global agenda. Now let me kind of go into those elements with a little detail. Protect nature, what do we mean? We would like to protect 30% of EU's land and sea. That would naturally be based on the Natura 2000 network and on the national designated areas. The 30% target is an EU-wide target, and that would take into account the specific situation in the member states. And it would also integrate ecological corridors to build a coherent network. And we would like to strictly protect a third of these areas, noting that covering areas of very high biodiversity value and are important for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And this includes, in particular, primary and old growth forests. Secondly, restore nature. The biodiversity strategy includes an EU restoration plan with 2030 commitments. First, we will present legally binding targets, which shall be proposed in the course of next year. We want to achieve no deterioration of any protected habitat and species by 2030, and the trend should be positive for at least 30% of all species. We need to increase agroecology and biodiverse landscape features. This implies a reduction of use and risk of pesticides, up to 50 or even more, 50%. Reduction of pollution from fertilizers by 50% and reduce the overall use by 20%. We aim to plant an additional 3 billion trees respecting ecological principles. That means planting trees not only in rural areas, but also in the urban areas. And we aim to reverse the decline of pollinators. EU restoration plan commitments also cover remediation of contaminated soil sites, the restoration of 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers. It includes an urban agenda, a new urban greening platform based on the Green City Accord. We'd like to encourage and trigger the deployment of blue and green urban infrastructure on a large scale, knowing that this will provide multiple benefits, in particular also for human health. And that is something that has been shown clearly during the lockdown situations that we have been living through in nearly all countries of the European Union, and we are still in it. The urban green space has become, the importance of urban green space has become very obvious. We would like to halve the number of red list species threatened by invasive alien species, and we would like to reduce the damage to seabed and reduce the damage to bycatch, meaning working towards sustainably fisheries. All this needs the enabling of transformative change. The protecting and restoration of nature will also contribute to this transformative change, but it will not happen by magic or by itself. It needs a governance framework. It needs unlocking financing in order to invest in nature-based solutions. It needs business engagement. This cannot be carried by the public sector alone. It needs true collaboration between private sector and public sector and also the population at large. It needs knowledge and education on all levels, starting from the kindergarten, schools, tertiary education, in order to bring back nature back into our lives, make people understand how important it is to reconnect to nature, also for our own health. EU for an ambitious global agenda. I quickly whiz through because this is maybe of lesser importance, direct importance for your direct work, but still it's important to know that all the things you do, they also have an impact in the global arena. EU's position for the post-2020 biodiversity framework is outlined in the biodiversity strategy. It reiterates the 2050 goals in line with the UN vision of living in harmony with nature. We support ambitious global 2030 goals and targets that are currently being negotiated. We look for an improved means of implementation. This includes finance, capacity building, research, know-how, and technology. Above everything, we need to scale up and step up implementation. This will be the second revision of the biodiversity strategy. This will be the revision of the IG targets, where these drivers had been identified, and yet over 10 years implementation was not strong enough. So we seek in the new framework much stronger implementation, and we hope that through stronger monitoring and review this will be achieved. We would like a fair and equitable share of the benefits from the use of the genetic forces linked to biodiversity. And of course, all this cannot be achieved without equity, equality rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and involvement of all stakeholders. This is really an endeavor of individuals, companies, governments, subnational governments. We all need to work together on this. The global the global biodiversity agenda is not a standalone agenda. It's clearly interlinked with the Sustainable Development Goals. It's clearly interlinked with the climate objectives. And as I said before, the challenges are interdependent. That means the objectives can only be achieved in an integrated manner. This means strong green diplomacy. We work through the international ocean governance, but this also needs to have an impact on trade policy and international cooperation. Finally, a bit of an outlook on the next steps. The implementation of the actions that have been touched upon in the strategy will be further laid out. There will be a specific annex to the strategy that's currently under preparation. And now we are eagerly awaiting the reactions from the European Parliament, the Council, the Committee of the Regions, or the Economic and Social Committee. There will be in the next week, there will be the United Nations General Assembly, and there will be a biodiversity summit where heads of states will make statements supporting the international agenda. And we hope that the EU will be represented by our Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. And then finally, the post-2020 biodiversity framework to be adopted at the CBD COP. The idea, it was originally scheduled this year, but because of COVID, all these international meetings have been postponed, and now it's likely that the three conference of the parties, all three of them, biodiversity, climate change, and under the Convention of Desertification, of the three Rio Conventions, might have their conference of the parties next year, in the second half of next year. So a little slide for you, if you do not want to look at the whole presentation, just only go to this slide. There you have all what I've just said in one slide. Thank you for your attention.